Gentlemen, please welcome one of my real heroes, Steve Forbes.
Wow, Gary, that's quite an introduction. Thank you. Very, very kind. And nice thing about having him pick me up is I didn't have to tip him. and unlike many of you tonight, my dinner was free. So being of Scottish descent, I especially appreciate that. Not quite like a free lunch, but almost. But it is an honor to be here. And thank you to Jen and Rick for the great work they're doing. They and Gary exemplify something that Alexis de Tocqueville noticed about this country back in the 1830s. And that is what he called voluntary associations. People voluntarily coming together to do something, whether it was dealing with a problem, promoting education, professional associations, sports, numerous things. Americans were joiners. And Tocqueville had never seen anything like this in Europe with its medieval traditions, where you waited for permission or you waited to be told to do something. Over here, if people saw a need or an opportunity, they just went out and did it. And so what they saw several years ago, that liberty, what we take for granted, was under assault. And it's been really under assault since the Great Depression, which has cast a huge cloud over many of the principles. Looked like free markets didn't work, so many things didn't work. Government went from something that you cast a wary eye on to a great benefactor. The whole progressive ideology got a new lease on life and force that it never had before. And so they decided to do something about it, and our being here tonight is an example of what determined people can do in this country. Plus, as I told Jen, when I told Jen, too, the name is great. Steamboat has just got that great name that sticks in your mind. And so people want to know, what is this? Whereas if you had some traditional thing like we love liberty or something, yeah, all right, it sounds like a lot of others. But Steamboat stands out. Congratulations. I haven't seen any steamboats, but it's a great name. I know it's the name of a town. But also, too, the person you honor tonight, in the honor of Tony, Kelsey's work, underscores something that we who believe in these principles need to take to heart more and more. It's not enough to enunciate a principle like liberty and freedom and limited government. You have to do it in a way that means something to people, a takeaway, you might call it. And doing those videos in a way that makes these issues alive and real for people is how people become convinced. I mean, in the Bible, Jesus used parables to get points across. We have to learn from that. People love stories, and the ability to tell those stories well is how we get our principles across. The left has been masters at this. Every time they want to fight something, they always seem to occupy the high moral ground. And I'm not going to use the word idiot, but our friends in Congress, and I'll get to health care in a minute, but I just have to say it now. When they took up health care first, which was dumb, they justified it, both to Trump and to everybody else. Oh, this reform will save $1 trillion over 10 years, which means we can get more tax cuts. The Democrats didn't waste 2 seconds in pointing out and making the whole metric on how you judge this so-called reform of Obamacare as how many people are going to lose their coverage. Would it be 15 million, 10 million, 30 million? And they're going to use the money to reduce business taxes. Boy, that's a real winning strategy. Throw Aunt Tilly on the sidewalk, intravenous, middle of a cancer operation, but by golly, we're going to save money to get that business tax down. I mean, what were these people thinking? Instead of doing what Kelsey and many of you here recognize is framing the issue. If you don't frame the issue, you've already lost. And we see it too in this whole thing of talking about free enterprise, capitalism, whatever you want to call it. Too often, commerce and philanthropy are portrayed as polar opposites. You have commerce on one side, business on one side, and philanthropy, charity on the other side. Polar opposites. And so business is, hey, it delivers the goods, gives us a higher standard of living, makes it possible for us to get more stuff. So we put up with it, even though it's based on greed, according to them, puts profits before people. It's inhuman. The strong crush the weak. You know all the cliches. We had a panel today on Hollywood. You know, in Hollywood, as research has shown, the businessmen, they're always men, very rarely women. The businessmen are villains who kill more people in the movies than do serial killers. And they're caricatures. Either they're obesely fat with jowls going up and down in glee as they figure out how to kill the household pet and everything, or they're skinny, flinty with crackling fingers as they try to figure out how to pollute rivers and blow up beautiful mountains and things like that. Absolute caricatures. But that's what people take away. So in the culture today, you sort of tolerate commerce because you know you need it, but it's kind of not exalted as, say, writing a poem that no one can understand. And so you tolerate it because it delivers the goods, but then if you succeed in business, you atone for your semi-sinning by giving it away. And even the words that we use, I use them all the time. Giving back, not giving, giving back. Giving back implies you took something that you didn't deserve in the first place. You know, you're playing in the sandbox with Tommy, you take his toy truck. No, give it back. Give it back. And so the real truth is commerce business is the exact opposite of these caricatures. How do you succeed in business? You succeed unless you have the state behind you, cronies behind you in Washington. You succeed by providing something that somebody else wants, meeting the needs and wants of other people. And it's done through transactions, which is the opposite of greed. I give you something, you give me something back. Adam Smith talking about the baker and the butcher and the dinner. Now, transactions, even though everyone gets something from a transaction, some are true are more fun than others. It's much more fun buying a new pair of shoes or a fancy sports car than paying the electricity bill, or if you're a renter, paying the rent. Although it seems human nature being what it is, people who complain about the electricity bill never hesitate to go out and spend $300 on a pair of blue jeans that look like they came out of a dumpster. I mean, just the way it goes. You know, it's amazing. I mean, you'd never think of selling a new car by making it look like it had just gone through a Michigan winter without being washed for 3 months. But selling clothing, yeah, this is hot stuff, you know. Anyway, enough on that. But it's about meeting the needs and wants of other people through transactions, voluntary transactions. It brings about the opposite of the character. It brings about cooperation. Going back to the essay, I Pencil, back from the 1950s, the incredible things that go into making the seemingly simplest things. People working together without them knowing it. It actually enhances humanity, breaks down the barriers. You know, we take it for granted today, if you want to get something done, you want to get the best people possible. That's fairly new in human affairs. Until recent times, you'd never trust anyone beyond your immediate family or faith or sect in a town. Never would do it. You still see that mindset still in much of the world today. And breaking humanity, you know, knowing your customer. You may not love your neighbor, but you sure want to sell to your neighbor. So you try to figure out, how do I get this person to take what I'm offering? Now, meeting the needs and wants of others, sometimes we don't know what we want. Steve Jobs, who never lacked for self-esteem, once was asked about, does he do marketing surveys? He said, no, because people don't know what they want until I show them. But it gets to the essence of entrepreneurship. You put something out there, you hope people will take it, but there's no guarantee that they will. And it brings about creativity. And the source of it all is treating all of us as individuals, as equals. We're all created equal. Lincoln understood it, the founders understood. That is profoundly important. It's one reason why people from the most unlikely backgrounds Maybe they fail a few times, like Henry Ford, when broke twice before he finally hit it with the original Model A in the early 1900s. Silicon Valley, it's almost a badge of merit that you've had a burnout or two before you finally hit it. But that's it, as Tom Sowell pointed out. What's the difference between us today and people of the Stone Age? Same planet, same appetites, same human bodies. Difference between us and them is we know more. We have more knowledge. If knowledge is not destroyed, you can survive physical catastrophes. We saw that after World War II. Immense physical devastation. Tens of millions of people, young people, losing their lives. Japan actually being hit with nuclear weapons to quickly end the war. Experts thought it would take generations for Western Europe and Japan to get back on their feet. Thanks to the U.S. security umbrella, within a few years, they exceeded pre-war levels of production. Why? Because knowledge was not destroyed. California had a drought recently. Now they're having a lot of rainfall, but of course, being California, they can't put the water in reservoirs because they haven't built them in 500 years. But, we hear a lot, we're going to suffer water shortages. If we have water shortages, it's because of our own lack of brain power or fortitude to apply what we know works. Take Israel. Modern state created in 1948 in a desert. Rainfall has been declining in that area for years. Does Israel have a water problem? No. Why? It's amazing. Here they are, 10 times the population since their founding in 48, 16 times the agricultural output, 50 times the industrial output. And yet the net use of water in Israel, not per capita, but the net use today is 10% less than it was nearly 70 years ago. Why? Because of human ingenuity. Desalination plants, they have several of them. They do them in 2 or 3 years. California took 15 years to do one at half the capacity of an Israeli one at 3 times the cost. Welcome to the Golden State. And they have shower heads that feel like ours, but use 1/3 the water. And agriculture, drip technology, all of these basic things. So it's human ingenuity. And so this is what free markets allow. Freedom allows people, often failing, usually failing. But when they succeed, their success is ultimately our success. So is the system perfect? Of course not, because people are not perfect. Madison, I'm paraphrasing here, had it right. If we were angels, we'd not need laws. Manifestly, we are not angels, except maybe grandchildren, but they only to a certain age. So we do need sensible rules and laws, but not the kind that we're being hit with today, which is not about regulation or sensible rules of the road, but about controlling us and controlling more of our lives. So the bottom line on commerce, and we've got to get the language. You can cheer, please. But the bottom line on all of this is the seeming paradox. The U.S. is the most commercial nation ever invented. And that's one of the reasons why we're exceptional. We were invented. Just didn't come out of the misty forests of the past. We were invented deliberately. We're also the most philanthropic nation ever invented. Seeming paradox, not a paradox, 2 sides of the same coin. Meeting the needs and wants of other people. Skill sets may be different, although some entrepreneurs become great philanthropists. But meeting the needs and wants of others. And that's why government welfare fails, because it's not reciprocal. You help somebody, but they do something in return, which is the most effective kind of charity for people who have the ability to do it. You help them with the understanding they're going to help themselves. And so it works. And looking at the world today, we're starting to make some progress here. Although somebody told me a nice one-liner before dinner, since I just turned 70, I'm very sensitive to these things. How do you slow the aging process? Make it go through Congress. So as you know, on the deregulation front, serious things are being done at EPA and FDA and elsewhere. unglamorous, but this is something this administration is actually undertaking. Unglamorous work. It's going to take a few years to get a real payoff, but they're doing the scut work now that will make a real difference. But let me just hit three biggies tonight that we have to focus on. They're no secrets. As I mentioned, I'll discuss health care in a moment, but the big thing now is taxes. Of all the things the administration has to do, the number one by far is taxes. They got to get a big, fat tax cut. And we have to underline the word cut. They botched it on a major reform of the tax code. They did it because, all right, I'm going to get personal. A certain speaker in the House got the idea that if you're going to cut taxes, you have to raise taxes. You compute that, cut taxes to raise tax, raise tax to cut taxes. So they concocted this thing from a Berkeley economist, that should have told you enough, of a 20% sales tax at the border, which would have slammed the very working families who elected Trump and the Republicans last November. Really smart. Kick your supporters in the groin, the ones who are living from paycheck to paycheck. Genius number one. And they kept sticking to this thing, so now they're finally dropping it, maybe. But they spent months on this idiot thing instead of focusing on real tax reform. So what I think they're going to have to do at the end of the day, which is coming soon, is on the personal side, you're not going to reform the code. I can tell you from experience, if you want to touch one preference, you're going to have to touch all of them. You're not going to be able to make huge changes. Some, but not huge ones. So do what Reagan did in the early 80s. You have across-the-board income tax cuts. Then a few years later, after Democrats lose a few elections, like they did in 1984, Walter Mondale, the Democratic candidate, said in his acceptance speech in San Francisco, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to raise taxes, and I'll admit it, and they won't. So, boy, that really worked. Won one state, lost 49. Okay. Democrats got the message. 85, 86, the environment was ripe for a big tax change. And they did it. We haven't done it since. But their tax change passed the Senate 97-3. And if it hadn't been for the thrashing that old Walter Mondale took in 84, never would have happened. So we're going to have to focus on winning these elections next year, and maybe we have to wait till 2020 so they learn. But we can still do big reforms after 2018 if we increase our seats in the Senate, which we should. There are 25 Republican seats, 8 Democrat. Now, that's not a guarantee of anything. I remember, I'm old enough to remember in 2012, it was 23 Democrats, 10 Republicans. We should have gained a bunch of seats, but instead, being the stupid party, we ended up losing 2. But, maybe we'll do better next year. But if we increase our majorities in the Senate and hold our own in the House, which we should if we get this economy moving, then we'll be in a position to do some real reform. But in the meantime, the GOP's got to stop floundering. Why are they floundering? Because, in ancient times, the Greeks had this thing called the Delphic Oracle. You went up there and there's a lot of smoke and hocus pocus, and you got your instructions, yes, great wisdom coming. The Romans, perhaps they had some Las Vegas genes. They had Delphic, they had Vestal virgins dancing around, giving it so you didn't notice what the predictions were. You just said, yes, this is pretty good. But Republicans being Republicans, what do they worship today? Not virgins or smoke and mirror show. They worship computer printouts from a thing called the Congressional Budget Office. What a lack of imagination. I mean, come on. The fact of the matter is their predictions are never right. If they actually knew something about the future, they'd be buying lottery tickets, not working for the CBO. They'd be on the Forbes 400 rich list. They're not. That tells you something. A horoscope would tell you more about the future than the CBO. I was going to say chicken entrails, but PETA may object to that. We can't cut up chickens anymore to see the future. But so take the daily horoscope. But they worship this stuff. They take it very seriously. We're going to have X trillion debt. How about predicting how much rain in inches Texas is going to get in the next 72 hours? It keeps changing. So much for the CBO. But anyway, and the Democrats knew this Republican strange infatuation, which is why when they took control of Congress in 2006, what did they do? They packed the CBO with healthcare people who believed in socialized medicine. They were already setting the stage for government control, more government control of healthcare, by making sure the oracles knew what to say. Now, our geniuses, they win in 2014. They take the Senate. They take the House. What do they do about this packing on the health side of CBO? Nothing. Come on. Don't you have a little Harry Reid in you? Do you have a little Boss Tweed in you? Come on, guys. And then on calculating, this goes back to, sadly, Newt Gingrich in 1994 when we took control of the Congress. They didn't change the way the CBO calculated, scored, as they call it, taxes and revenue. Tax cuts, they always assume tax cuts hurt the government. Tax cuts never lead to greater growth. And so they made some minor changes. Paul Ryan was so proud of them. We made some minor changes. No, you should have fundamentally overhauled the thing. Instead of saying, well, the model will predict what the growth will be. No, you know what gets growth, like big tax cuts? Start with, put in 4% growth and tell us what you get. Yeah. So they lose these things from the beginning. The fact of the matter is, if in the last 10 years we'd had our historic average of 3.5% growth, we'd have a budget surplus today. Growth compounded is amazing. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. So, are we going to get a tax bill? I think we will. Samuel Johnson, who invented the modern English dictionary, I'm paraphrasing here, once said, "The prospect of a hanging focuses the mind wonderfully." The prospect of a political hanging, I think certainly on the House side, is beginning to focus these members. You know, a lot of them will lose jobs. Some of them become lobbyists, but none of them really want to become Uber drivers. And so they're beginning to get it. They may pass a good bill next month or in October and do some good stuff. Then it becomes the Senate. And, you know, they've got to get over their CBO obsession. Maybe the Uber driving thing will make them finally see the light. They finally are dropping this 20% sales tax, at least for now. And so what should they go for? On the business side, go for the 15% and make it applicable to pass-throughs. They say, oh, a lot of people try to cheat. Good. I love people trying to get down to a 15% tax rate and encouraging businesses. Do it. Instant expensing, maybe not get all of it, but get a big chunk of it. Stop taxing profits overseas, or at least sharply reduce it. Basic stuff. And on the individual side, since you're not going to get a big reform, do the rate cut, 15, 20% across the board, and CBO will go absolutely bonkers. The Times will go berserk. That's a sign you're on the right track. You know, it's, you know, get rid of the alternative minimum tax. Get rid of the death tax. Let them say, oh, this is terrible. When people, and double the exemptions for individuals so people right away feel it. A couple, instead of $13,000, $25,000 exemption. So a family making $50,000, $1,500 extra bucks a year. They'll notice that right away. And then do something that'll really set off the other side, make it retroactive. If Bill Clinton could make his tax increases retroactive, we can make tax cuts retroactive. Make it to Jan 1, 2017. So it won't matter when you pass it this year, just make it retroactive. That does two things. One, it gets the economy ginned up. But two, putting our Harry Reid hat on, come April, people are going to get a big fat refund in an election year. Hello, guys. It's very sad when somebody from the journalism world has to give advice to politicians on how to win votes. I mean, it just shows the state of the Republican Party. So those are the things you should do. Now, so I think the House will do something. Senate's going to be problematic. That's where we're going to have to get to work. And the president's going to have to get to work and make, when he thinks it's right, a nationwide speech and make the case why it's your money, not the Washington politicians' money, and you need to earn more of it, and this is a way to do it, and make the case. Because the bottom line is when the economy is booming, and this president should really appreciate this, it covers a multitude of sins. Really, it does. I mean, look at it. Bill Clinton got in a bit of trouble in the mid-90s. Now, imagine if he had in 1996 the kind of economy Richard Nixon had in the mid-70s. Rampant inflation, rapidly rising unemployment. People feel things are going to hell in a handbasket and nobody knows what they're doing. He'd have been out. By contrast, if Richard Nixon in the mid-70s had a booming 1995, 1996 kind of economy, he would have survived. But instead, there was a rotten, terrible, worried atmosphere, rapidly rising unemployment, double-digit unemployment rate in the 70s went higher than it did after the 2008-2009 recession. Really rough times. So growth is good. Growth is good, guys. So now, bottom line on the tax thing, we should push after we get a tax bill, so we live to fight another day, push for the flat tax. I'm not going to rehearse the arguments except this. You know, you can have generous exemptions for adults and for kids, family of four, making $52,800, no federal income tax. All good stuff, no death taxes, allowed to leave the world unmolested by the IRS, all good stuff. And for people who are worried, I'm going to lose my deductions, say, well, you can have a choice. You can go with the new system or stay with the old. See which one is better. Takes the wind out of the opposition. And it's not an economic issue, it's a moral issue. In the last 20, just take, the IRS estimates we spend 6 billion hours a year filling out tax forms. Experts estimate we spend upwards of 400 billion complying with this monstrosity. Just go back 20 years. Take those tens of billions of hours, literally trillions of dollars, immense brain power. Imagine if instead of going for this crazy, corrupt, complex code, it had gone instead for new products, new services, new medical devices, new cures for diseases. How much better off we'd be. What economists call opportunity costs have been huge, huge. So let's make the moral argument. Now, health care. Let me take a bit of water. Like the Fed, I believe in liquidity. But on health care, very basic. Let's cut to the chase. Why do we have a health care crisis? It's not the overall quality in this country. Overall, the quality is the best in the world. People say, well, people like me are getting older. We want too many health care services, so the prices go up. People can't afford them. We have a crisis. But step back for a moment. Why is demand for health care considered a crisis, whereas demand for anything else in this economy is considered a great opportunity? People want more apps. A lot of writers glad to help you out. You want more cars. Detroit and other manufacturers glad to come to your assistance. So why is health care demand considered, oh my God, what a disaster? You get a big breakthrough. People are going to live longer. Oh my God, we can't afford it. People are going to live longer. Oh my God. It's so weird. Ask the question, why do we have a health care crisis? It's not demand. It's because we don't have free markets. It's basically third party. Hospitals know their revenues depend on how well they negotiate with insurance companies and the government, and perhaps big employers, not how well they satisfy you, the patient. Nobody designed it. Don't say, oh, they're villains or that. It grew. So let's deal with it and work to get more patient control and see where the patient stands. I mean, the lousiest motel in America wouldn't dare put you in a room with another guest with a curtain in between, a sick guest wheezing away. But we've been so conditioned by this crazy system that if we get a private room, we think, oh my God, it's like the Soviet Union. I got a peach today. Nobody else got one, but I'm part of the nomenclature, so I got a peach. I get a private room. You don't think anything getting a private room here instead of a dormitory room. But so, and another example, robes. I mean, they look like the Salvation Army discarded them, been washed 50,000. You know how to put these things on? Do you put it in the front, back, side? It's because the patient's not in control. So the question becomes, all right, how do we get more patient control? And this is where perhaps maybe we'll fall into this. Instead of trying to pass an omnibus health care bill, and Steve Moore and others suggested this, instead push 10 or 12 different bills. Have a bill for nationwide shopping for health insurance. Are you for it or against it? So you get nationwide competition. How about equal tax treatment? If a company gets a deduction, why shouldn't the individual? Up or down vote. Individual mandate, for it or against it, up and down vote. Employer mandate, same thing. Make these people vote for it. So if you no longer can say, well, I'm against the bill because it'll hurt Medicaid. Okay, you don't have to vote for the Medicaid bill, but how about these other pieces? Let's get them through piece by piece. How about medical device tax? Even Elizabeth Warren, when somebody told her there are a lot of manufacturers of medical devices in Massachusetts, she said, oh, I don't like that tax. Well, put it before her, up or down, Senator Warren. I'd love to see her squirm through that vote. And other things, do other things, up or down vote. So you won't get them all, but then you can make the case like in Medicaid. Shouldn't states have more flexibility? For example, under traditional Medicaid, very hard to get treatment at home. Everyone knows usually you get a better outcome if the patient can be treated at home, so make it again. So Kelsey can come to your assistance. Make it a personal thing. Rhode Island tried it. Rhode Island had some pretty good results and lowered the rate of increase in Medicaid. So you get both. Like traditional markets, when they work, always turn scarcity into abundance. Do the same thing in healthcare. And finally on healthcare, how about transparency? Require. They'll resist it, they'll try to get around it, but eventually they'll succumb. Have hospitals and clinics post prices online for all their services. Just one little story, we'll get to Mary in a couple of minutes. A friend of mine in New Hampshire went to a cardiologist a few years ago. One of the tests the cardiologist recommended was a nuclear stress test. I don't know where they come up with these names, but apparently they put some radio, see how the blood flows or whatever. A social scientist, why do they call it a normal family nuclear? I mean, that tells you something where their ideology, nuclear, what do you mean, bomb? Family's a bomb. But anyway, so he asked in all innocence, what's the test going to cost? Doc says, I don't know, insurance will cover it. What's it to you? This guy, being an entrepreneur and therefore not quite normal, doesn't take things as they are, goes out, and with the team, gets prices for 25 different clinics and hospitals in the New England region. And the thing, this test is done the same everywhere. It's not as if one does better than another. It's a fairly routine test. And the prices range from $1,450 to $7,300, same test. So, end of the story, he goes back to the cardiologist, tells him the price range, says, I think I'll take the $1,600 variety. It's nearer than the $1,450 variety. The cardiologist says, what? This costs more than $1,400? I had no idea. True story, he gets up, does some calculations, and says, with your particular condition, there's less than a 2% chance this test will tell us anything useful. Let's do away with it. Why bother with it? Why bother with it? So, and another thing on the transparency front, how about having hospitals post each month how many patients die of infections after they're admitted to the hospital? While we're at it, do the same thing for nursing homes. And it's about a hospital, it's about 90 to 100,000. Now, we know when you go to the hospital, your immune system's not good, so we know that there's people are going to get infections just because of your condition. But experts estimate that probably at least 80% of those are preventable. Now, can you imagine a food chain doing that? I mean, look at the trouble Chipotle got into. They thankfully didn't kill anyone, but when people got sick, it shattered the company. They still haven't recovered. Yeah, in hospitals, thousands of people die unnecessarily, and boom, not a story about it. So on the healthcare front, make it a people issue. Make it a patient issue. Finally, then we'll get to Mary. It's the most boring subject in the world, so I'll be very quick on it. Federal Reserve monetary policy. Yes, it is boring. I know it's hot in here, and they haven't served coffee, unfortunately, but just bear 2 minutes on this. Just bear 2 minutes. And I'll just give you a story as a reward from what I'm about to do to you. If you ever find yourself on an airplane and coach, middle seat, on the runway, watching your life pass away. Want a little bit of elbow room? Start talking to your seatmates about monetary policy. They'll cut you wide berth. Now, the risk is you may get dragged off the plane for being such a nut, but I don't think they'll do that to you now. But the fact of the matter is, there are a couple of things to keep in mind about the Fed. It's been a disaster. Why, for example, does the Federal Reserve set interest rates? Remember, interest rates are a price between borrower and lender to rent the money. Now, we're all against rent control, but we've been so brainwashed we think it's nothing amiss that a government agency that knows less about the economy than just about anyone else, you look at their prediction, they make CBO look like geniuses, and yet they set the price of money. They're trying to do it across the board. Why do we let them get away with it? The bottom line is with the Fed, that you cannot control the economy from the center, whether through interest rates or trying to manipulate money supply and that. That's just command central control. We should tell the Fed, and with the Fed, this will shock some who've been taught economics, the Fed never can do good with the economy. It's just a matter of how much harm they do. So liberate the interest rates, get rid of that bloated portfolio, which in fact they seized over $3 trillion assets of the economy, and get back to what they're supposed to do, which was just preserve the integrity of the US dollar. They have thousands of economists. Uber, call them up. You should give them new job opportunities. And the idea that the Fed can control the economy, just let me end with one little thing on that. Money simply measures value, like clocks measure time, rulers measure space. And money is not wealth. Money is like a claim check. You know, you go to a restaurant in the wintertime, you check your coat. What do you get in return? Piece of plastic, piece of paper, worthless in and of itself, but a claim on a real product. You buy a ticket, maybe ellipsis on your handheld, or a piece of paper, worthless in and of itself, but a claim on a real product. That's what money is. It's claims on real products. You create it in the marketplace. They don't create it in Washington. You create it by doing transactions with one another. You understand that if money is like a claim check and money measures value, you're ahead of 99.9% of central bankers around the world. And so I'll just end with that. And just think of it. Imagine if the Fed was given control of the Time Bureau. They decided to float the clock like they do the dollar. 60 minutes an hour one day, 48 minutes the next, 12 minutes a day. You know life would be chaotic. That's what they do with money. And people say, well, that's reality. No, it isn't. It's absolutely perversion of what the real world should be. So bottom line on all this, you are on the right track. Make the moral case for liberty and freedom and the dignity of all individuals, fairly new in human affairs. And fight the fight on taxes, fight the fight on health care. We may not get it all at once, but they waited for decades to get what they got. We'll do it faster than they did, but by golly, they're going to get discouraged when we see it chip away piece by piece by piece, because most of what we're proposing is things that people like. People like it, so we're on the right side. And on the money side, recognize what it is and what a Wizard of Oz operation the Fed has had. So with that, let me say again, thank you, Rick, thank you, Jen, thank you, Gary, and all the work that you and all of you here have done. You're doing great work, historic work. I'm glad and honored to be here as part of the presence of it. And now we'll get somebody who actually knows what she's talking about up here to question me with Mary Kissel. Thank you very much.
I was wondering.
See, we love the environment. We're having green in between.
Except there are no leaves on it, Steve.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, certain kind of environment. Can everyone hear us? Okay. Is the
Hello?
mic on? Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Vlad, are you listening? 1, 2, 3. Is China tapping our mics? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Straight to Moscow.
You can hear
us?
mine?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Good.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. That was wonderful. You mentioned that it was your birthday recently. You turned 70. I
Yes.
believe that Churchill was a month before his 77th birthday that he became prime minister for the second time. So,
Say it again, Mary.
Are you gonna run for president in 2020?
The answer is no. Public housing's not my thing, you know. But no, I'm an agitator now, and that's why I love being among you, who are taking principles and figuring out ways to get them out to the people, so that we don't lose what our founders gave us.
You know, you started your talk, you said it all started to go wrong with FDR 7 decades ago. Can you hear me? Maybe I can project. Can you hear me now? Oh, goodness. Does anybody have a handheld mic maybe we could have? Okay. Rick's got it. Thank you, Rick. How about this? Can you hear me now? Great. I think I said, are you going to run for president in 2020?
Oh, now they're going to hear my answer. No, I'm an agitator.
You're an agitator. Okay. Well, you started out your discussion by referencing FDR, who left office in the 40s. That's a long time ago. Have we ever seen a bureaucracy killed? Was Reagan an aberration? I mean, how do you stay so positive?
Well, in terms of Reagan was right that the closest thing to immortality is a government program, a government agency. And the fight that it took to get rid of the Interstate Commerce Commission, the Civil Aeronautics Board, which, by the way, to show that it's not hopeless, you know who started that round of transportation deregulation? James Earl Carter. And the deregulation bill on railroads, which turned our bankrupt railroads into the finest freight system in the world, better than Europe, better than anybody, which is why Warren Buffett bought one of them. Fantastic system. That started under Carter. Reagan obviously pushed it through, but so even Democrats can see the light. And you know who was the big sponsor of the, especially trucking deregulation? Edward Kennedy. So there's hope. Now, he peaked early, but in terms of understanding what happened with the Depression, America was unique, and the Brits and the Dutch less so, but we never had, the Brits never had an absolute monarch, going back to Runnymede. And because they weren't fighting constant wars on the scale the Europeans were, they did not get that centralized power. Not to go back in history and bore you, but remember this, it'll impress people at cocktail parties how learned you are. But in the 1600s, both Britain and France had massive uprisings. In Britain, the rebels won. The king got his head chopped off, and yes, they had a restoration, but it was short-lived. Whereas in France, the monarchy won with Louis XIV, and he emasculated the aristocracy, Versailles, all there, where they won, each day was a big deal if they got to button one button of Louis' shirt. And so they had these massive centralized governments, Spain and others, Austrian Empire. And so, but Britain, Holland, the Dutch provinces, and then the United States always had a small, relatively small government tradition because we didn't have this, we weren't fighting constant big wars. And to most Americans, until about 100 years ago, their only contact with the federal government was the post office. And after a war, especially after the Civil War, total war, the government receded. Spending receded. The income tax put in as a measure to finance the war repealed, and government powers receded. We went from an army of 1 million to 1.5 million to 30,000. And after World War I, massive war. After the war, the tradition kicked in the 20s with Harding and Coolidge. Government spending was slashed. Taxes were cut from a high income tax rate, which reached a high of 77% during World War I, was down to 25% by the mid-20s. National debt was reduced by a third. And by the way, in 1929, the U.S. had the largest economy in the world, the most sophisticated economy in the world, and government spending as a percent of GDP was 3%. Local government was 10%. That's where most of the power was. And then came the Great Depression. Nobody foresaw it, nobody understood what caused it, and people then began to get the impression free markets are inherently unstable. And the government, Keynes and others said you have to have the government there as a stabilizer. And so Roosevelt, they looked to Mussolini's Italy. This was before he allied himself with Hitler. Does that work, having more state power? By the way, the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, if you look in your history books, they always have the Blue Eagle. You know what that was, the NRA? Industries would combine, companies would come together and determine codes of conduct for every participant in that industry. Prices, conditions of working, and if you violated those codes, if you were a dry cleaner and you charged below the code price for pressing a shirt, cleaning a shirt, you went to jail. People went to jail. The Supreme Court eventually threw this out. So this is where free markets were discredited. This is where Hamilton was discredited until amazingly, only in America could it happen, that a play would come along and a musical and resurrect his reputation. And so we haven't really covered from it that free markets are inherently unstable and they hurt people, and the government is there to help out when free markets fail. Even though every economic crisis, as you know, your colleagues write about it all the time, has as origins massive government mistakes. Every single one.
There's clearly momentum for deregulation, smaller government, lower taxes. But Republicans not only face their own internal discord, they face a Democratic Party that isn't willing to do the business of politics. Is that a problem? And should Republicans do things like tax reform alone? Is that a good idea not to have bipartisan tax reform?
Well, in terms of bipartisanship, let's go to Obama. How many votes did Obama get from the Republicans? How many did he really seek from Republicans? When he had his original stimulus package in 2009, the Republicans were a demoralized party, had taken a shellacking in not only the presidential election, but in the congressional elections. All the gains they'd made since the early 90s, starting with Gingrich, wiped out. And so they were if Obama had made a real effort, he could have gotten about a third of the House Republican members through some traditional political horse trading to go along with a stimulus package, which would have meant that this was bipartisan and would have taken a huge issue away from the Republicans. Same thing on Obamacare. You remember in '94, Bob Dole was willing to cut a deal. Just give me a place at the table, Senator Bob Dole. Phil Gramm was the skunk in that garden party, courageously came along and fought this thing, and support was gathered, and we defeated Hillary Care, which saved Bill Clinton's presidency. And so sometimes you got to push these things on your own. And on terms of the Democrats, right now they're so fearful of the Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders wing of the party that you're going to get primaried. They don't worry about general elections because most of them are from safe seats, but they worry about getting primaried and having millions of dollars financing their opponents. So even if they win the primary, they are scarred. And they know that if they get to Congress, re-elected to Congress, their clout, they're going to have a hard time because the base of the party is going to see what subcommittee are you on, and they're going to be out to get you. So that's why Schumer, who would be quite willing to cut a deal with Donald, he knew him for years. As soon as he made even a slight hint at that, he got such blowback, he said no. So the bottom line is on that, do the big cuts. Know you're going to get criticized, because if the Democrats don't do well next year, then they're going to start re-examining. Just as when they got slaughtered in the presidential elections, they started to see the light. That's how Bill Clinton created his leadership council, centrist Democrats. Election losses, they begin to notice that. And so that's what you have to do. If we make big gains in the Senate, and we should make some good gains, we keep control of the House, they will be a demoralized party and be starting to ask themselves, what is our purpose? Where do we go from here? Clearly the lurch to the left hasn't worked very well. They may still nominate a lunatic for 2020, but if they lose that, then they're going to be doing some real soul searching. That's the only way you're going to get bipartisanship. There's no way you can do it now unless you surrender. You got to get the voters and the public on your side. And then, as Reagan said, the heat is applied and they see the light.
I know it's late, so we won't keep you guys for much longer. Obviously, the big theme of your talk tonight, the ability to persuade, to make the case for freedom. We have to address President Trump. He's a declarative kind of president, but he seems to have a hard time making the persuasive case for his policies. How do you rate him? Do you think he can make the case for things like tax reform or another go at health care reform?
Well, we all know health care was not something he dreamt about each night. He made that quite clear. Just give him a beautiful bill and he'd sign it. But taxes he does care about, and can he persuade when he puts his mind to it? You look at the speech he gave as sort of a State of the Union on February 28th, which should have probably been his inaugural speech. Really good speech. His speech in Poland, very good speech. The speech he gave, I thought, on Afghanistan, this is a guy who's on the opposite side and made the case why we have to be there and what happens when we aren't there, as we discovered on 9/11. We threw away a hard-fought victory in Iraq. He was good. Then what does he do the next day? Get another spat with Mia Brzezinski. I don't know who he's fighting. But he keeps stepping on his own story. And so that's what so on the tax thing, I hope, in addition to the Republicans in Congress realizing they better get something big done or they're going to be in trouble, I hope the president realizes this is one opportunity to get the one big victory that means the most, more than infrastructure, more than anything else. You get that big tax cut, it makes everything else possible. Creates the environment where people feel, yeah, things are starting to turn, maybe he isn't such a bad guy. And that's why you can't just look at his disapproval ratings, even if people don't like him. If things are going well, start thinking about other things than tweets. And he'll be fine. So I think he's got to have that revelation. Don't step on this one because everything hinges on it. I think the Republicans are beginning to get the message, and if they do, we'll get a bill that will actually do some good and make it possible to do the other things that need doing.
Wonderful. Please thank. We're going to thank
Thank you. Thank you.